Welcome back to the Pro Football Hall of Fame for another installment of our Before the Snap series, today featuring our great friend here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Mr. Seth Levit. For those of you who have never tuned in for this program before, what are you going to learn about? Well, we're going to learn about what it takes to have a career in and around the NFL. And today we got a really unique viewpoint of what it is like to work for an NFL organization and the tips and the tricks it takes to get those jobs. But then also outside of that, what it's like to work for somebody who played in the league, work for a foundation, work for a nonprofit, and even dabble in a little bit of a podcast hosting role as well. So we're going to learn a lot about the world and around the NFL today. And if you've tuned in before, obviously you know what the program is all about, and we thank you so much for tuning in and week out. As always, my name is Jake Ray. I'm the Youth Education and Leadership Manager here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, where it's our mission to honor the greatest of the game, to preserve its history, to promote its values, and to celebrate excellence together. And those values we promote are those of commitment, integrity, courage, respect, and honesty, all of which made the 371 men who have a bronze bust on display here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame the great football players and great Hall of Famers, but it made them great men off the field as well, and truly can make you students the best students you can be, and one day the best member of an organization that you can be. So before we do get started, I have some thank yous I'd like to pass out. First, I'd like to thank all the teachers, administrators, professors, educators, anybody that's watching us live right now in their class, showing us 6 months down the road, or happen to just to send this link out to their students. Thank you so much for allowing us to be a small part of your students' learning experience. And secondly, I got to thank the students. Without the students here, this program doesn't take place. I got my iPad in front of me. I got a lot of questions I can ask Seth, and Seth knows me, and he knows I have a lot of questions. But we're here to hear your questions, students. So as always, in the chat, throw in there your name and the school you go to. We want to see how many colleges we can get represented here today and the universities all over the country. So right now, go ahead, throw your college and university there in the chat. And then if you have a question, all you're going to have to do is put your name, the school you go to, and then go ahead and type out your question. I'm a one-man operation here today. Nathan and Jerry, who you usually see on this program, are both out at other programming here in Stark County. So it's just me. So I'm going to be looking off screen, looking at my iPad here today, but I got everything right here to my right. So we'll go ahead and put your question on there, and we'll be reminding you students here throughout the program to do that as well. So with that being said, we are lucky and grateful today, as I mentioned, to be joined by Seth Levit. Seth has served as the Executive Director of the Jason Taylor Foundation since its inception, having helped the football legend establish the 501c3 organization in July of 2004, while also assuming the role of publicist and off-the-field manager for the Hall of Fame defensive end. In addition to the foundation work, he also co-hosts the Fish Tank podcast as part of the Miami Dolphins podcast network, alongside two-time Miami Dolphins teammate MVP O.J. McDuffie. Additionally, in 2023, this will mark the third season that Levit, McDuffie, and Travis Wingfield have hosted the Miami Dolphins post-game radio show. I didn't even say radio host in there as well. Prior to joining the foundation, Seth spent 8 seasons with the Miami Dolphins as a member of the club's media relations department and the staff that was a recipient of the 1999 Pete Rozelle Award, an annual honor awarded by the Professional Football Writers of America to the NFL's best public relations department. Believe now this is our second Pete Rozelle Award recipient we've had on the program here this year. So without further ado, Seth, welcome to Before the Snap.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this. I was concerned, but I pulled up YouTube here, and at least there's a few viewers, so we're not alone here, as much as I love hanging out with you, Jake. But really an honor. I never would have thought that when I was sitting in a college classroom studying sports administration 100 years ago that I would be doing something like this in partnership with the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So it's pretty exciting. It's a little eerie hearing that, I've been with the foundation since inception, and that was 2004, because we're coming up on 20 years. So it's been a minute, as they say, but yeah, excited about this. I hope there's some great questions from the young people, and hope I can offer them something as well.
Awesome. Well, we've got a bunch of colleges popping up here already, so looking forward to getting some of their questions. So first and foremost, we just kind of want to start out with that 10,000 foot view. What's the day-to-day life look like? So with your current role with Jason Taylor's foundation as the executive director, what's the day-to-day look like? What you're handling throughout the week, and some of the things you might be working on throughout your time there with your role?
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's ever evolving. And again, in 19 years, there's been a heavy evolution. Early on, when Jason was still playing, it was a different dynamic because every Sunday we knew where he was going to be. He was going to be exceptionally visible. And, the nature of this great sport that we all love is that people want to be associated with that. And so immediately they are interested in the work that we're doing because I like seeing Jason Taylor knock quarterbacks down. So what is he doing to help young people? And they'll go check that out. Now it's a different process. So now 19 years into it, we have to be something we have to be an organization that can stand on our own merit, that we're about our programming. And, oh, by the way, the name on the door is this really cool guy. Although he's visible again now that he's coaching football at the University of Miami, not Miami of Ohio, but University of Miami down here in South Florida. He's every Saturday, he's pretty visible there on the sidelines and getting fired up. But as far as what I do day to day, it is a little bit of everything. So we have to determine what our programs are, how we're going to execute those programs, communicating with my staff. Our biggest programs are our poetry program, our Blue Apple Poetry program, which you're familiar with, Jake, because we've done some open mics there at the hall, which has been really cool. We have an after-school literacy program for middle school students. We have a new careers in sports program, which is kind of like what we're doing right here, but it's geared towards high school students. We have another former player, Troy Drayton, who was a teammate of Jason's, but 10 years in the NFL as a tight end, and Troy's overseeing that program for us. So communicating with our team, understanding what's going on, what challenges we have, what ideas we have. I'm a big idea guy, sometimes to the dismay of our staff, because I'm constantly trying to come up with things and challenge and grow. But really, that's a big part of it. Then it's how do we tell our story? Are we on social media? Are we letting people know the great work that we're doing, and letting them know in a way where it's informative and not performative, right? Where we're not just trying to pound our chest and show off that we're doing great things, although it is important to tell our story. And then there's the fundraising element of it. How do we pay the bills? How do we keep the lights on? How do we raise the money so that we can offer great programs like this? So that's kind of a day-to-day, and that is really simplifying it. If my wife was listening to this right now, she said, well, why does that keep you there till 6 o'clock every night? But it's an ever-growing, evolving world, much like it was when I worked in football, in a sense that, there are the things that you can anticipate are going to happen, and then there's the things that you never would expect happen. But it's what keeps it interesting, and it's something I'm very passionate about and love participating in.
Obviously you said there in your intro there that you did start with the Dolphins, obviously be able to grow a relationship with a guy like Jason Taylor. So can you start to talk a little bit about how did that relationship begin, and ultimately how did you end up taking the step out of the NFL into the nonprofit world and running the foundation?
Yeah. Great questions. And if I didn't feel old then, I certainly do now when I start throwing these dates out. But I did an internship with the Miami Dolphins in 1996. So right out of college, actually, I did an internship with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I was in your great state of Ohio with the Cavs in 1995. And then 96, I got to come home and really live out a lifelong dream and go to work every day where the Miami Dolphins were working and practicing. And so that was pretty spectacular. That was Jimmy Johnson's first year, another Hall of Famer. So 1996, 1997, I got hired on full time. And in April that year, we drafted this skinny kid out of Akron, Ohio, right down the road from you there, 20 miles away. And his name happened to be Jason Taylor. And so we started working together right away. As I worked with all of the players, but certainly the younger guys were guys that as a younger member of the organization and of our staff, I spent more time with those guys. My old boss, Harvey Green, who was a legend in and of himself, was a PR director for the Dolphins for a long time. When I first walked in the door, he said, I'm the PR guy for Jimmy and for Dan Marino. And then we had a gentleman named Mike Hansen, may he rest in peace. He said, Mike's in charge of all the other starters, and whatever else is left is you. And so whatever else was left were the young guys. But for me, 1996, we drafted a guy in the 5th round named Zach Thomas, who I think you could find his bust there not far from your desk. In 97, we drafted a guy named Jason Taylor, and we had all these other great players around as well. And so I got to work with those guys right away. Quickly, they proved themselves on the field and got a lot more attention from Harvey and the others in the organization. But I built relationships with them early on. Also, being a younger guy, and this happens often in sport, is that certainly the heads of communications departments work with the star players, very hands-on. But the younger the players are, there's more of a connection oftentimes with the younger members of the staff because, they're just closer to your peer group. You maybe grew up watching some of the same television shows. Maybe you listen to the same music. With Jason, he knew I loved to pick up basketball. He's, hey, where's a good basketball court? Where can I go play some hoops? And we kind of bonded right away. And he was always a guy who I think his image was something that transcended the football field. So as much as football was important to him, he was on, again, I'm going to date myself here, but shows like MTV Cribs, BET had a show called 106 in Park, and they wanted dynamic personalities like Jason to come on those shows. And the other people in my department had no idea what they even were, let alone, would be excited about them. So more of those opportunities would come up. It gave me more of an opportunity to work with some of these guys. And the longer you're there, and there's a lot of turnover in the rosters in professional sports, but when you have people like Jason Taylor, like Zach Thomas, like Sam Madison, like Patrick Surtain, who are going to be on a roster for quite some time, you just start to work with them a lot. And when you're working in professional football, you're seeing people 6 to 7 days a week, 12 plus hours a day. They're your family away from your family, and you start to build the closeness. And with Jason and I, we became very good friends in addition to, working together closely.
Awesome. And the question obviously we get throughout this program is, what's the start? How'd you get to start? So Ben from the University of South Carolina, his question is, what path did you take to land a position in the NFL? You talked a little bit about gaining an internship. So you talk a little bit about that path, but also why that path? Why was sports what you wanted to do? Why was that the ultimate goal that you had to work for an NFL franchise?
Love it. Love the question, Ben. Thank you. You're at South Carolina, so I'm going to, I apologize in advance, but I was at the University of Florida, so, some SEC rivalries over there. But I grew up in South Florida, and I grew up a diehard, passionate Miami Dolphins fan. Not a great athlete. I knew right away that if I was ever going to work with the Miami Dolphins, it wasn't going to be with a helmet and shoulder pads on, and I wasn't going to be a coach. And so I was always curious, what do the other people do? How do those other people get there? How do they get from where I'm at in the bleachers to the other side of the fence? And who are those guys driving around in the golf carts? And who are those guys in the shirts and ties that are standing in the sidelines? And I was always curious about that because I was so darn passionate about the Miami Dolphins. I lived and breathed by their wins and losses, and I wanted to be associated with it in some way, shape, or form. And my senior year in high school, I overheard a conversation where someone was going to study sports administration. And, back in my day, to go way back when, that wasn't as common as it probably is now. The programs weren't as sophisticated as they are now. And I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know that you could actually study something like that. But instantly, I knew that's what I needed to do. I knew that I wanted, and which was great for me because I know a lot of people find themselves and find out what they want to do when they get to college. But I stepped on campus, and actually I looked for colleges that I thought would have strong athletic associations and big time athletic programs so that I could be around that and learn those skills, knowing that my goal was always going to be to work with the Miami Dolphins. I just didn't know in what capacity. But when I got to the University of Florida, I met somebody, happened to be, his name was Terry Kors. He was in the dorm room right next to me, and he worked for the baseball team. He worked with they call them the sports information department on the university campus, and he helped run the scoreboard and keep stats for the baseball team. And, basketball season was happening as well. I started in the spring, so I'd missed football season. And he said, well, maybe I can introduce you to the basketball SID. It was a guy by the name of Joel Glass. And they gave me a shot. They let me put on a tie. I didn't even know how to tie a tie. And I had to tie a tie and sit down on press row and would keep backup stats in case the computers failed. I would keep rebounds, or I would keep, assists, or whatever it might be. And 2 or 3 years later, I was staffing the backup stats crew. And, I was working, collecting the stats and working the press room and passing out things to Dick Vitale when he was in town and things of that nature. And I just loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved that I could make an impact and be involved in sports, something that I was passionate about, something that I loved, even though I didn't have the talent to go out and put on a uniform and contribute that way. And it made my goal of working with the Miami Dolphins something that became more tangible. Still was going to be difficult because I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of students that are watching this now, and there's only so many jobs, and I didn't just say I want to work in the NFL. I chose one team. So I basically said, okay, there's essentially 3 jobs on the planet that I'll be okay with and satisfied with. And that's not an easy thing to do. I went and somehow scored because I had built some relationships with people in the sports information department. They connected me with Harvey Green, who was the head of PR for the Dolphins. And I met with Harvey, and he was very nice and he was very informative. But he also said, look, we only bring in grad students. I would encourage you to explore however many teams that you can, whatever you can, find something you can do in sport. Because one of the biggest things that I can leave you with here is that you have to build a network. You can't just have a resume. You have to build a network. You have to have somebody that you can put on as a reference, and that someone else, because this is, as much as it's a huge industry, it's a small world. And if Jake gets a resume and he sees on a reference that there's somebody that he knows, if my name's listed as a reference, he knows he can call me and he can cut through anything that's on that resume and he can find out what I think about, that individual. And so fortunately, at the University of Florida, they got me in front of Harvey Green. Harvey said, go build your network, go work in sport in any way that you can. And I found out about this internship opportunity with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it was a pretty robust opportunity in all these different departments. And I called them up and I flew out for an interview, and they hired me, and that started my journey. And the one crazy thing that I didn't know was that Harvey Green with the Dolphins had been the PR director of the Cavs. I had no idea about this. He actually hired the 2 guys that I spent the entire season working for. And I built credibility with them, and they had credibility with Harvey. And so they were able to recommend me after my internship, and Harvey gave me a shot. So I had to go all the way to Ohio to come back to South Florida and to live my dream.
Awesome. I got some questions rolling in now. Right along that networking and idea, this is from Mackenzie. She goes to Central State University. Outside of internships, what other opportunities did you take upon to help you secure your position?
Yeah.
What environment did you put yourself in to achieve that goal of yours? So you mentioned networking, you mentioned growing that network. We know there's jobs, and we know there's internships, and we know there's all these opportunities. What were some of the things you did while you were in college outside of that to make sure you were prepared for that next step?
Sure. Internships, but volunteer. A lot of times you can't even get internships without experience, right? So volunteer your time, volunteer. For me, I volunteered for this, once I realized that I had this opportunity with the sports information department, and that was also kind of where I think my strength lied. I like to tell, I could write decently. I like to tell stories. I love numbers and statistics. And so all of those things were I think suited for what my skill set was. And I just poured into that. Any event there was. Football was, it was all hands on deck at the University of Florida for football. So I got to work in the press box there. I started literally answering the phones for score updates. This is, pre-internet, but I literally, like, John Clayton would call, hey, what's the score? This is John Clayton from ESPN. What's the score at the University of Florida game? Do you have a scoring update? You would get a call from the AP, and I would answer the phones 100 times a game back in the Steve Spurrier Fun and Gun days. And, they'd score 60 points and the phone was constantly ringing, and you would give score updates, but you're there and you're present and you're in the environment and you're meeting people, and so it is networking. It is volunteering. It wasn't an internship at that point. I wasn't receiving any credit for it. I wasn't getting paid to do it by any stretch of the imagination, but I had the opportunity to do it. And so once you get in those circles, you start to find out that there are other opportunities that exist. And you just got to keep your eye open for them, and you try to say yes as many times as you can to get in front of people.
I think that's great advice. Obviously, networking is that kind of that major topic, that real point that gets hammered home, especially when I was in school. And anyone who's watched this before knows that I didn't like doing it. I was always going to be that guy who didn't want to interrupt anybody or didn't want to introduce, because who wants to talk to this college kid? But
yeah,
being on the other side of it now, and I think, Seth, you agree this, you see the benefit of doing it, and you're wanting somebody to come up and talk to you. We want people to ask questions. We want people to watch this. The goal of this is exactly what you were talking about there, is to, be something to start the networking journey. And for those students who are tuned in, we have almost said Jason. We got Seth's LinkedIn information posted in the chat too. So, take advantage, take that next step, introduce yourself. It really opens the door for a potential networking opportunity. We got some more questions rolling in for you, Seth. This question is from Simon at the University of Pittsburgh. Okay. What piece of advice, and this could be deep, what piece of advice is something that you wish you knew when you were in college that you know now?
Oh, man. That is going back a long, long time ago. It's, wish what I knew then. I was very fortunate that I was just pushed to, again, to meet people, to make a good impression. You know what it is? And I don't necessarily feel like I missed out in not knowing this until I was exposed to it, but this is hard work. It is a competitive space, but it is hard work. That sports are glamorous. We're excited and attracted to sports, especially at the professional level or big time college sports, because it's on television. It's glamorized. We now see it in social media and everywhere, and all of these great, all the content that exists around sports, and the players are larger than life, and the coaches are larger than life, and the brands literally are larger than life, and that's super cool and it's glamorous. But working in sport, working in what is essentially entertainment for other people, you are working when other people are chilling. You are working when other people are sitting back on a Sunday and having a cookout and kicking their feet up, and it's their day off. That's your hardest day of the week. You're not only working when they're working, that's your hardest day of the week in football, for example, on Sundays. And so it is hard work. There is a heavy dose of accountability that's going to be placed upon you, regardless of what level you're at. And you just have to understand that if you're going to get into this, it's going to be a grind. And there's going to be things that are exciting. There's going to be things that you can never encounter in any other field that you work in, but there's also going to be a price to pay for that. And I think that's just something people need to understand. And I don't say that to scare people away, but I think it's important that it's not all just rose-colored glasses and that people, oh my God, you're going to do this and you got to work with Jason Taylor. And yeah, but I also would work in football 7 months out of the year with 2 days off, and that was our bye week, and I did that for 8 years in a row. And I loved it. And especially as a young person, it'd probably be different now, married with 3 children. But there are sacrifices that are made to work in sport. And I think it's important to understand that. And then as I'm telling that story, there's one other piece of advice that I did get early on, and it was with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And our general manager at the time was a gentleman by the name of Wayne Embry, who was one of the classiest people I've ever met in all of sport. And he told us, I remember he gave me a golf shirt. It was a Cleveland Cavaliers golf shirt, and it had the Cavs logo on it. And he handed it to me, and I went to grab it, and he kind of held it. And he was a giant man. He played in the NBA. He's a giant man. He has huge hands. And he held it, and he didn't let me take it yet. He says, when you put this shirt on and that logo is on your chest, you're not Seth anymore. You're Cleveland Cavaliers intern. You're representing a brand now. You're representing something that's bigger than you. And if you do something wrong, Seth's not in trouble. The Cleveland Cavaliers are paying the price for that. And so I think it's understanding that, Jake, you work for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, for crying out loud. If you went and did something that you shouldn't have done, then you're not only, it's not I forgot to study and I failed a test and the only person who's impacted is me. It's not that. It's if I made a mistake, I have made my department, my supervisors, I've made this brand, this shield that represents the greatest of the game. I've somehow, tainted that shield in some way, shape, or form. And so it's a big responsibility, even at the internship level, to put on, that shield, that logo, and to put your name in association with that type of a brand, that type of an organization. So those are 2 pieces of advice I think I could give that are something, look, I could say be the first one in and the last one out and all of those things that are also important. But those are 2 things that I think I kind of had to experience before I understood it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I actually just had a conversation here with somebody the other day about, what do you wear when you travel? And it's like, well, do you want to be logoed up or do you not want to be logoed up? And part of you is like, yes, I want to be out there. I want to represent the brand. I want somebody to ask me a question about my job. I want somebody to be inquisitive about, well, why are you just a big football fan? Who buys a Pro Football Hall of Fame coach, or who buys a Hall of Fame hat? Well, it's where I work. Here's my job. And then you get into the whole thing. So it is cool. And it is representing that brand. I got an interesting question for you here. And this is from us. We got some other students' questions rolling in, so we'll get back to those. But in my world, I've worked at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It's been my only job. It's a nonprofit. Jason Taylor Foundation, as we mentioned, a 501c3 nonprofit. You come from a world in the NFL that is very heavily for-profit.
Indeed.
So what's the difference between that for-profit atmosphere and then that immediate change to, well, we're not for-profit anymore, we're a nonprofit 501c3? What are the similarities and differences, and how do you balance the drastic change from the for-profit to the nonprofit world?
Yeah. The drastic change with respect to, people hear for-profit and nonprofit. Nonprofit still needs to make money. We still need to raise dollars. that Hall of Fame is gorgeous. I don't know what it costs to sculpt every one of those bronze busts, but there's probably a pretty penny that costs. And all of the events that you're doing, and all of the people that work there are not working for free. They're being paid, but they're just being paid for this missioned purpose. And so that's the difference there. But you still have to generate dollars. And for me, I was not when I worked for the Dolphins, I was in PR. I was not in a revenue generating position. I never had the pressure of raising money. The people who sold tickets did, the people in marketing did, sponsorships did. I didn't have those pressures. I had different set of pressures, and they were heavy, and we were accountable to coaches and CEOs and so on and so forth. But when I stepped into this role as executive director, I'm responsible for every penny that comes in here. I get a lot of help, but if we don't raise money, we can't pay our staff. If we don't raise money, we can't run our after-school reading program or our poetry programs. We can't run those things. So we still have to generate revenue. It's just for a different purpose. In sport, especially professional sport, the ultimate bottom line is, especially if you're on the and I'll say football side, just because that's what we're talking about here, is winning. You wins and losses. Now, team owner, team CEO, they're also looking at spreadsheets. But all of those things, if you win, all of those other things kind of take care of themselves. Still got to have a good sales team. You still got to market yourselves well. But if you can win, it's a whole lot easier to do everything else. So everything everybody is responsible for is, how do you help the team win? Now, I'm not calling any plays. I'm certainly not knocking down a quarterback or throwing a touchdown pass, but could I help those individuals who are responsible for doing those things limit distractions? Can I help them manage high pressure situations? Can we help raise their profile? All of those things are how I could contribute. The person who passes out the mail contributes in a different way, but everybody goes in there with the understanding that your responsibility there is to help this organization find a way to win games and in some way, shape, or form. And so those are two big differences. We define winning differently here on the nonprofit side. But what I think that it depends on the size of the nonprofit. You work in a really large one. I work in a small one with a cool name on it. Our staff, when I worked for the Dolphins, and their staff is so much more massive now, but you have multiple departments, 2, 3, 4, 10 people in every department. Everything is specialized. I'm not only executive director, I'm essentially the social media manager, right? I am the director of development. I wear a tremendous amount of hats. I have people underneath me that, who I work with, who deliver the things that we need to deliver, but it's a much smaller team. So it's more hands-on, you're accomplishing more. You have to kind of think broader and across multiple areas of the organization, as opposed to being hyper-focused in a singular one. So those are some of the things that jump out at me.
You've been involved with the game or sports, pretty much your entire life, working in football for, you said, 20 plus years, just with the foundation. That doesn't even count the time you spent with the Dolphins. And so being around the game of football, obviously being around us here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, how important the values of the game are. So from your perspective, somebody involved with the players, now on the nonprofit side, doing good in the community, how important are those values that the game teaches? When no matter you're playing it, you're a Hall of Fame player, you're a third string quarterback, or you're a fan in the stands, what do those values mean? And what are some of those values you've seen that have come out of the game of football that have helped you in your career?
Yeah, that is such an awesome question. And we could probably fill this entire interview up with, addressing those things. I think on the immediate, especially in football, which is the greatest team sport on the planet, and it really does require everybody working together for a common goal on the field, off the field. So learning how to work with others, learning how to put the goal and the mission and the purpose above yourself and your personal interests. I think those things are critical and lessons that you learn every day, and you see it, and you see the sacrifice that go in the Miami Dolphins locker room, and you have all these alpha males and litany now with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Ramsey, and you've got superstars splattered all over the roster there, but they all maximize that, but at the same time have to be able to say, how can I also be a cog in this machine? So I think you learn that working in football in particular, but sport in general, I believe. Accountability, I used that word before. I'll say this, Jake. I think there are two industries in this world that if you go into the corporate sector, that people immediately will respect you. One, if you come from the military, because they know the demands. I mean, there's no higher level of expectation and demands and high pressure situation. People come from the military. But if you work in sport, I always joke, you haven't worked if you haven't worked for a coach. Because the NFL football coaches and the expectations they have, and the fact that that's a world where, there's no human resources. Like if you don't, on the field, if you don't do your job, you're sent packing. If you rub somebody the wrong way, they will replace you. That's how that works. And there is human resources. The working environment isn't exactly like being in the locker room, but some of that bleeds into, I think, the rest of the organization, in the sense that you have to be accountable. The expectations are high. The work is going to be hard, but the payoff is so worth it. The payoff is so worth it. And so I think all of those things have allowed me to be committed to excellence, to try to always represent myself, my brand, and the guy who took a chance on me and put me in this position in JT to represent his brand, everything that he built, the name that he built, it deserves that. Pro Football Hall of Fame deserves that. The Miami Dolphins deserve that. Whatever other organization you're associated with, that organization deserves you to be at your best and to represent them in the right way. And I think you learn all of that from being around sport.
You mentioned there the payoff, and obviously you mentioned it's, you get 2 days off during the football season. Obviously the off season is a different story, but it's, it's an everyday, you're working pretty much 365 days a year with a few days off, here and there. But, the cool thing about sports is you get to be a part of some things that people in their life dreamed about being a part of. So the question we always like to ask is, you're done being the executive director, you're kicked back in the lazy boy, the grandkids are over, and they ask you, what was your favorite moment you ever got to be a part of in sports? So if you can sit back right now and pick it, what would be that one moment that sticks out to where you go, wow, I can't believe I was there?
Can I pick two?
Just sure.
Because I've had multiple worlds.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
So working with the Dolphins, and this may not even be fair, but one that jumps out at me was, and if I mess up the date now, I want to say it was a 2000 season. It was in 2001 when it happened. The Dolphins haven't won a playoff game in a long time, long time. But the last time they did, it was a home game against the Colts. And it was a wild card game. Peyton Manning, a lot of the names that are, again, now in the Hall of Fame, which is pretty crazy. And this was Jay Fiedler was the quarterback at this point. And he threw 3 interceptions in the first half, but they battled back in the second half, and they had a running back by the name of Lamar Smith, and he had over 200 yards rushing that day. But we went into overtime, and they were marching down the field, and I'm on the sideline. So I got to be on the sideline at that point towards the end of games. Harvey Green would immediately grab the coach, and then my job was to help the sideline reporter. You see those interviews instantly after the game. Well, how did that player get there? They tell the PR, the member of the communication staff or the PR staff who they want to talk to. So my job was, okay, if they win this game, I need to be able to go get a player and who do they want, so on and so forth. And you have to be professional. You don't want to be a fan. You don't want to have your face paint on in the sidelines. But this is a playoff game, and this was overtime, and it was pretty incredible. And as they were just marching down the field, I want to say Mike Vanderjagt was the kicker, and he maybe had missed a field goal in overtime earlier. So we kind of were on our ninth life, and Lamar Smith bounces off tackle, goes 17 yards, dragging people into the end zone, and it's a walk-off. The game is won at that point. And I remember running on the field from the sideline with all the other players, and I pumped and I never do this, but I was pumping my fist because I was like, we live to see another day. And it was just so exciting. And I had to chase Richmond Webb down. So Richmond Webb, a guy who I believe should be in the Hall of Fame, but that's another conversation for another day. I had to chase Richmond Webb down and grab Richmond because he was going to be the guy they wanted to talk to because of all the rushing yards that the team had. And it was just electric. It was electric to be on that sideline. It was electric to walk in that locker room afterwards and hear the team celebrate. And, it's something that I couldn't replicate that in any other business, and it was just really special to be a part, to just be almost a fly on the wall. I mean, I had my job, my responsibility, but just to be a small part of that was a big deal. And then the second thing, and I'm not pandering to the audience here, but the guy I work for, after he retired in 2011, he became Hall of Fame eligible, and to go through the entire process of meeting Armando Salguero, who was the selector, who was going to be his presenter, and talking to him about what he thought Jason's chances were and how he wanted to put together a presentation for the selectors, and learning the process. the Hall of Fame to me is football heaven. And I've always just, someone gets to wear that gold jacket and it's so amazing, but then to be close to it and learning the process, and then being in, and I didn't get to go to Houston when he got the knock on the door from David Baker, but I was on FaceTime with his son, Mason, who now plays for LSU as tight end, but he was a much smaller guy back then. And if you go back and watch the video, you hear his phone buzzing and he keeps ignoring it. And, it was just amazing to see that everything that he did, every sacrifice that he made, every play that he made, that it was recognized, and he was going to be considered one of the greatest of all time. And then to fly out with him and to meet you all there in Canton and to tour the Hall of Fame with one of my best friends, who just his forever football home now is going to be in Canton, Ohio. And I got to just be a part of all that, the entire journey, all the way up through his enshrinement, helping with the speech. I mean, what for me, as again, kind of getting goosebumps talking about it, but going back to thinking about being a little kid and to know what the Hall of Fame meant then, and to one day think that I was going to be this close to and partner with the Hall and work with an individual who's going to be one of those. You said 371 now, he's 308. So I think, it was like right around 310 when he went in. It is a select few that get to be a part of that. And so to have that involvement has been one of the most meaningful moments of my professional career, without question.
Well, I'm not going to say that the second answer was very good. Definitely enjoyed hearing that. And obviously getting to know you and work with the foundation over the years has been an enjoyment of ours, as much as you enjoyed, your time here in Canton as well. So I'm dive back into some of the questions from our students. We got another one here. This is Jake from Quinnipiac University.
What's the name of the university? I'm sorry.
Quinnipiac.
Okay.
Quinnipiac, I think I'm saying that right. Do you have any influences that led you to work in sports? So you talk about being a huge Miami Dolphins fan. Were there anybody you looked up to? Were there players you idolized? One day I want to be that guy out there working with them. What were some of your other influences to get you to work in sports?
Yeah, I mean, my two heroes growing up for the Miami Dolphins were Nat Moore, and if Nat's become a good friend now, and so he's probably would get a good kick out of that. But Nat Moore and Dan Marino. I mean, who didn't grow up in 1983? Dan was a rookie. I was 10 years old. You talk about formative years, and he changed offensive football. And to watch what he did with Mark Duper and Mark Clayton, it was electric. It was unheard of. And, I fell in love with the sport for sure. I liked it. And then I fell in love with it. And, and then he played. And what's crazy is he was 10 years old when I started. When he started, I was 10 years old. And then in 1996, I got to work 4 years with him. I got to be a part of that. I got to walk off some of those fields with Dan, as I was describing that playoff game, and he wasn't a part of that. But so for me, it wasn't that I saw people who were doing the job I wanted to do, because I didn't know what that job was. I just knew I wanted to be a part of all of that. How could I be a part of that logo? I love that logo, that team, that organization, and I wanted to be a part of it. And certainly that started with Nat Moore and Dan Marino.
Following that question, got a question here from Joseph, who goes to Baldwin Wallace University. How did you balance your emotional attachment to the Dolphins while focusing on your tasks and objectives for the team?
I love that question. That is such a great question. And whenever I talk to young people, and not that I don't love Jake, but I feel like I can't see who I'm speaking with. So I love hearing the names and these schools. I always say that when you're sending your letter in and you're applying to an organization, I always say no face painters. Don't talk about what a big fan you are. But yet your fandom and your passion for that organization are things that make you uniquely qualified at times. Sometimes depending on,
Might be
if
a little
fandom
too
becomes,
much.
if it's fanatical, then maybe you're better off working somewhere else and just enjoying the things that you love about that team. But for me, I subscribed to the Dolphin Digest as a kid, and I would get media guides, and I studied those media guides like textbooks. And this is a geeky thing to say, but I guess this is the right room to say it in. I never realized that I was preparing myself to be a PR person for the team. I cite things that happened when things would happen to the team that I worked with. I would cite things that happened in the 70s because I studied that stuff, and I would hear about it from my stepfather, and I loved it and I lived it. But if I came kicking down the doors talking about what a fan I was and the fact that I could recite Dan Marino's stat line from 1984 with 5,000, how many passing yards? I think it was 5,084 passing yards and 48 touchdowns. And like, if I came in, they would have been like, whoa, 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 And so it's such a great question because you do have to suppress those things. One of my favorite stories, Jake, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie School Ties. It's an older movie, Brendan Fraser, back when he was a leading man before he plays the type of characters he plays now. But he played a kid who was a Jewish kid who got recruited, and the movie took place, I want to say, in the 40s or what have you. Matt Damon's in it, Ben Affleck's in it, and this private high school that's trying to win this big annual game against another private high school. They need to get a new quarterback, and they find this kid, and he's a Jewish kid, and this is like a Catholic school, and this kid's from the other side of the tracks. And when he walks in and he realizes that he's out of place, he has a Star of David around his neck, and he takes it off and he puts it away because he's kind of, at the beginning of the story, he's hiding from the fact that he's Jewish. And I used to wear this chain with a Dolphins logo, a gold Dolphins logo around my neck. I wore it all through high school. I wore it all through college. And the first day of my internship, I remembered this character doing this in this movie, and I took the chain off and I put it away. I said, you know what? I want to be respected, not for my fandom, but for my professionalism. And I mean, are you kidding me? I walk into work and my office now is the Miami Dolphins locker room, essentially. There's Dan Marino, there's OJ McDuffie, there's, this guy and that guy, and Tim Bowens and Richmond Webb. And it was emotional and it was incredible. And that was never lost on me. It did become more the norm, but it was never lost on me. But I had that charm kind of put away. And again, once people start to respect the work that you do, they want you to root for the team. Who wants an employee working for a team that's rooting against their team? So, but there becomes a difference between being fanatical versus being someone who's passionate about that team winning. So I hope that answers the question, but I literally had that moment where I took the chain off and said, okay, this part of my life has to take a pause. And maybe it's only for a year because nothing was guaranteed to me. Didn't know it was going to end up being, my career.
Awesome. We got another question here. This is from Mackenzie again from Central State. Another question. So, when applying to sports internships and other opportunities, how does she make herself stand out as an outstanding candidate?
Yeah, that's always a great one. This is where I think the work you do before that application is critically important, right? It's that, what can you show as far as your level of experience? What events have you worked? Who have you worked with or for? And I am so big on references. I know I said it earlier, but I'm going to continue to say it here. References. I don't want a resume, and I don't know what they teach now with resumes and CVs. I know it's changed a lot, and LinkedIn certainly has. Wow, it's made the world so incredible for you all that, as you try to network. But I want to know who your references are, because again, awesome. You went to Miami University or UMass, one of the great sports admin programs on the planet, for a master's degree. And that's awesome. And you did this and you did that and your GPA. But wait a minute, you worked with Jake. You worked with someone that I know. That's the first thing I'm going to do. If I find that, is this person worth a darn? Can this person cut it? Do they, what it takes? You know who I am. You know what my expectations are. Can they cut it? So how do you stand out? It's the work you do before you type that resume. What are you able to put on that resume? So I think that's something. I think if you're writing a cover letter, again, don't be a face painter. Don't try to be too cute. I remember getting resumes where they start doing a countdown and the clock's ticking, and they're almost like writing the lead for a sports column. And that's not necessarily what I'm looking for in that moment. You want to be professional. Obviously all the things about checking your spelling and those things. But I think, what can you put on that resume that will be something that will stand out to the individual because of who you worked for, the job that you did, and I say job, it could be a volunteer opportunity, but the things that you did, the things you did them for, and who can I call that I might know that that could speak highly on your behalf. I hope that helps.
No, I think that's a great insight there too, because you obviously could have said, put your experiences, put your schooling, put your volunteer, but you dove in and kind of looked at, not what's just typed on that piece of paper. We got time for a few more questions here. I want to talk a little bit about, you kind of had almost 3 different careers. You've had your time with the Dolphins, you've had your nonprofit work, and now you're, back in the media world. You're hosting a podcast, you're hosting a radio show. Was that always the goal, or is that something that's kind of presented itself and you're like, you know what, let's take a stab at it and see if we enjoy it?
It was never the goal, Jay. It was never the goal. It's kind of wild. And it is, you talk about 3 careers. I feel like I have 2 full-time jobs right now. And one is the Jason Taylor Foundation. Now, if JT heard this, he would be like, no, you have 1 full-time job and don't you forget it. But no, he's very supportive and he listens to the Fish Tank podcast. Part of why media relations, communications was, I thought, tailor-made for me is because I was shy. I didn't like public speaking. I didn't, I think there are people that feel that their face and their voice belongs to the masses and they should be on television. I was not that guy by any stretch of the imagination. I'm still not. And so I like being behind the scenes. I like being around it. I like being able to work with sports writers and to give them ideas for columns and then to read what they're going to do. And I like being able to help athletes as to how to handle something or how should you approach this interview or what are important things about yourself that you don't even realize are important, but other people should know. I love all of that aspect of it. But I didn't necessarily want to be on the other side of the microphone or the camera. And after I left the Dolphins, I did start to understand the importance more of whether it was putting myself out there or the organization out there, because we had to raise money. We had to support this great cause. I started being more of a spokesperson for the organization when Jason wasn't available. And, you start to get a little bit more comfortable in storytelling, so to speak. And I love telling a good story. You can tell how long-winded I am here. But I had a friend who was a sports writer who I hadn't heard from in a while. And I just checked in on him and I said, hey, what are you up to? Is everything okay? And he was starting a podcast network. I had heard about podcasts. This was 5-6 years ago. I'd heard about podcasts, but I hadn't gotten into the space. I felt like I was just inundated with content, whether it's the Dolphin stuff, whether it's watching my guilty pleasures like The Voice and American Idol or whatever, or TV and my kids and everything else. I said, I can't consume anything else. But he said, I'm starting a podcast network. And he started to tell me how he was building it. And one of the wonderful things about podcasting, and really what podcasting was intended for, was that everybody has access to tell their stories and to do it in a public way. And he was building this network with some people who were professionals, but the majority of the people he was building the network with were fans. They were fan content creators. And I was like, well, if those guys could have shows, is there room for an old washed up PR guy who happens to work with one of the South Florida icons? And he said, yeah, I feel like you just have this great list of people in your phones. You have this contact list. You have stories to tell. And so I started to get intrigued. I talked to OJ McDuffie about it, and we figured we'd give it a shot. And we thought that anytime we get together, we love telling old stories. We love remembering things that happened, funny things that people would never believe. And what would a crazy Dolphins fan think if they walked into a restaurant and sitting in the booth where OJ McDuffie and Zach Thomas and then some other guy they didn't know, but clearly he knew them, and they were telling all these funny stories, and I was sitting behind them and I could listen, and it was hysterical and it was amazing. It's like, what if we could bring that to people? And we just started to do it, and man, it's been fun. It's been fun to tell the old stories. It's been fun to initially it was just the people that we knew, but between OJ and I, we kind of know everybody. And then the players themselves start to follow the show. They love hearing the stories again. I had Trace Armstrong reach out to me, and he said, what you're doing is so important because a lot of guys, it's tough for them to transition out of the game. And they were told how important they were when they played. And then people start to forget because the next group of guys come up. But this show allows people to tell their story, to say how they meant something, that they had their moment. And it's been so much fun. About a year and a half into it, Jason Jenkins, who has recently passed away, devastating tragedy to lose him, but he was a real visionary with the Miami Dolphins. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, I think your show needs to be on our network." I thought I was in trouble. He said, "No, we want your show to be a part of what we're doing." So the Fish Tank went from being independent to moving on to the Miami Dolphins podcast network. And it's brought me back home in a lot of ways. I feel like I'm reconnected with the team. I don't work for the team. But they license our show and I work with the team now. We get to film episodes in their studio in their new facility. We occasionally get current players. Tua's been on the show. Mike McDaniel's been on the show, which was amazing. Jalen Phillips and Alec Ingold and all these guys have been on the show as well, in addition to the alumni. And it's just been a lot of fun and it's been a whole new world for me. And it does keep things interesting. And it allows me to continue to be close to something that I've been passionate about since I was 7 years old.
Awesome. It's cool to hear that, you have all these different careers, but at the end of it, it kind of comes full circle and you're right back to where your passion brought you into the sports world. So got time for a couple more questions. So one thing we like to do, we started this last year. We started our rapid fire segment.
Ooh, I like it.
We're going to go through that and then we'll wrap up with one more question. So does that sound good?
It's great.
All right. Question number 1, LinkedIn, a great way to network or just another social media app?
Great way to network. Absolutely amazing way to network.
Number 2, GPA on a resume. Keep it on, leave it off.
Depends how strong your GPA is. If it's impressive, leave it on. If it's not, then I don't think it matters.
Number 3, social media accounts, public or private?
Again, depends how much junk you got on there. I think private is probably safer. We're going to check them. If you're applying for a job, I'm going to check them and clean up your social media. Don't have pictures of you at the frat party from, whatever it might be. If you're looking for a job, if you're not, then have fun with it, what have you. But I think that once you want to step into this industry, you got to represent yourself professionally from start to finish.
Number 4, jeans at work, all day, every day, never, or only on casual Fridays?
As a young person, I would say never. Outdress everybody in that building as best you can. Doesn't have to be the brand names, but if you can show up in a shirt and tie, if you can show up in a suit, like you want to make yourself noticed. Do not show up in jeans. Well, even if everybody says, "Oh, it's jeans day," no. They're going to remember me because I was always dressed to the nines. At this stage of my life, I'll rock some jeans.
Number 5, coin toss, heads or tails?
It depends what I'm feeling in the moment. If you flipped it right now, I'm going tails.
All right. Last one. You score a touchdown. Go-to touchdown celebration.
I can't dance, man. I am a conservative dude. I won't say I'm so conservative that I would toss the ball back to the ref, Barry Sanders style, but I like a good old-fashioned spike.
All right. Awesome. Thanks for that. So last question here. And first off, again, thank you so much for giving time out of your busy schedule here to sit down with us, talk to me, and directly to all of the students we have tuned in today. We got over probably about a dozen different colleges represented from all over the country today. So we want to thank all the students for tuning in. Obviously, Seth, thank you for giving up some of your time. But the last question we always ask is kind of that last piece of advice you want the students to take away, whether it's something you already talked about, you want to hammer home again, or it's a brand new point we haven't really got to today. What's that one thing, that one nugget? If everybody can only remember one thing, what's that one thing you want them to remember here from today?
Yeah, I would say once you get your opportunity in a field that you think you want to work in, find your niche and be the best darn person to ever do that. And it could be the smallest thing. When I was an intern and really my first couple of years working in sports, I interned twice for the Dolphins and the Cavs, as I mentioned. We had to do clips. Now you go on and you cut out links and what have you. But back in the day, pre-internet, you had to literally get, for us, we had the Akron Beacon Journal up there when I worked for the Cavs and the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And every day we had to go into those newspapers, be the first one in the office and cut out clips and make photocopies and pass them out to everybody in the organization. And I said, I'm going to be the best darn person that's ever made clips. They're going to be neat. You're not going to have the fingerprint smudges. You're not, everything is going to be, I'm going to use like a T, a ruler, and everything's going to be perfect. And people noticed. Like, it seemed silly, but it was, if you're going to give me the most menial job in the organization, I'm going to do it better than anybody's ever done it. So find your niche. When I got to the Dolphins, I loved, they did things in the press release called Connections. And Connections was, okay, the Dolphins are playing the Jets. Are there Dolphins players who play for the Jets? Are there Jets players who play for the Dolphins? It was just a fun little thing. And usually there'd be 2 or 3 connections that they would put in there. I started doing a page and a half of connections. It was absurd what I would do. I would find guys that went to the same high school, or they did, and when the Dolphins in 96, the first year, Jimmy Johnson's first year, this was his first time coaching after winning Super Bowls with the Cowboys. The Dolphins played the Cowboys that year. And so the connections were endless, right? Coaches from our staff, players, the connections were endless. And I literally did almost 2 pages of clips, and I was driving into work and I heard on the radio, one of the coaches say, I looked at the press release and the connections were 2 pages. And that was for me like a Super Bowl. That was like somebody noticed the work that I did, because darn it, whatever job you are given, you got to find your niche, you got to exploit that niche, and you got to be the best whoever did it. And people will notice you and then give you other opportunities where you can do the same. So definitely find your niche and be as good as you possibly can. Do not look at anything as too small.
All right. With that, we're going to wrap up this installment of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's Before the Snap series today, featuring the Executive Director of the Jason Taylor Foundation and good friend of ours here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Seth Levit. Seth, thank you so much for being a part of the program today.
Thank you for putting this program on. I wish I could have seen something like this when I was a student. So thank you for that. Anybody who sat through this whole thing, thank you for giving me your time. And I hope I was able to help you. This was awesome, man. Thank you very much.
Everybody, as always, make sure you stay tuned into all of our social media channels here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Like, follow, subscribe. Anything else that you have to do on social media, follow us here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You're going to be seeing some really cool high school football stuff going out as we speak. There's a high school football state championship game going on right in our backyard here at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. So follow all that. Make sure you follow everything going on with the Miami Dolphins, our podcast network. Give the Fish Tank a listen. We'll plug that as well.
Hear all Fish Tank 81. Check us out.
Hear all the great things that Seth's doing with the podcast down there in Miami. We got one more program here to wrap up the 2023 year. Next week, we're going to be live here on Friday again with Vice President of Marketing from the Tennessee Titans. Her name is Kate Guerrera. Going to learn all about what she does down there in Nashville. Hopefully, maybe get an insight to the brand new stadium that's going to be coming down there to the Titans as well. So as we always like to say here to wrap up the program, we know the game of football just doesn't happen on Sundays or Mondays or Thursdays or Saturdays or whatever other day that the NFL is going to play during the week. There's so much work that goes into that, and it's just not 18 weeks during the year. It's a full-time job. So we want to give the insight just a little bit on what goes into that work, and we were super excited to hear from Seth today and everything that goes into his job, both when he was with the Dolphins and what he does now. So Seth, again, from myself, Jerry, and Nathan, I wish they're bummed they couldn't be here today. They're out doing some other great stuff here in the area, all the way up to Jim Porter, our president, and all the other staff you work with. I want to thank you for everything you've done for the game of football and everything you will do, or you've done and will do for us here at the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure.
Everybody,